Hello, and welcome to the 25th episode of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we talk about actresses who may have come close to earning Oscar nominations but were ultimately overlooked or omitted, or for one reason or another just didn't have the votes to make it into the final lineup, discussing why they may have deserved to get in and why they ultimately did not. Each episode has its own theme, presented as a double feature, and this week we're going to be covering two performances from Best Actress Oscar winners who were overlooked for a great lead performance either before or the same year as their Oscar win. And my guest today is an excellent film critic and member of many organizations such as Gallica and the North Carolina Film Critics Association, Southeastern Film Critics Association. She joined me for an episode of my Best Actress series, talking 2005 Best Actress. Welcome back to the show, Mattie Lucas.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Thank you so much for coming back. I'm very excited to dive back into the 90s with you.
Yeah, more Reese
Yeah.
Witherspoon.
Yes, you are my Reese Witherspoon correspondent. So I have bestowed that upon you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Question mark. Yes. But let's get into it. So I presented to my patrons here at And the Runner-Up Is a list of the 15 Best Actress winners who I felt gave a great lead performance prior to or the same year as their win. The options were, to recap, Olivia Colman in Tyrannosaur, Joan Crawford in A Woman's Face, Greer Garson in Random Harvest, Diane Keaton in Looking for Mr. Goodbar, Grace Kelly in Rear Window, Brie Larson in Short Term 12, Shirley MacLaine in The Children's Hour, Helen Mirren in The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover, Julianne Moore in Safe, Patricia Neal in A Face in the Crowd, Susan Sarandon in Bull Durham, Sissy Spacek in Badlands, Kate Winslet in Heavenly Creatures, Reese Witherspoon in Election, and Michelle Yeoh in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Great competition there. But the top vote getters were Julianne Moore and Reese Witherspoon. And just to give you further context for the results, Reese was the blowout choice for number one here. She had almost twice as many votes as even the second placer, Julianne Moore, who just edged out Miss Grace Kelly, unfortunately. But a lot of support for other performances too, which was nice to see. But yeah, before we talk Julianne and Reese, I wanted to talk about something that a lot of people have kind of talked about with the Oscars, which is the idea of many actors don't necessarily win for their best performances so much as like the timing is right, they were in the right movie, they were playing a famous person, whatever the case may be. Just curious if you had any thoughts as a critic who's definitely watched, I imagine, a lot of different performances from many Best Actress winners, either before or after their win. Is there a reason why you think people tend not to win for their best performance?
I feel like there's often such a narrative that builds up around the Oscars as far as someone being overdue or somebody being due. I don't know if it's a conscious decision on the part of the Oscar voters. I don't know if this is something they're necessarily like thinking about as they're filling out their ballot, and maybe it is. I've read a lot of those secret Oscar ballots,
Mm.
and some of the reasoning is a bit mind-boggling to me. But I do think there's a bit of dues paying that is expected from performers. So you see actors who have done a great body of work that are well respected, but they haven't quite had that moment yet. There's always somebody else whose moment it is. So they're like, well, we'll wait till the next time. And that's how you get, I feel like, a performance like Julianne Moore winning for Still Alice, which I don't think is a movie that anybody outside of hardcore Oscar watchers remember.
Yep.
And I think she's great in it, but I also think she's had better performances. So yeah,
Hmm.
I think that's just one of those little Oscar quirks where they like to have a narrative around a performance. And sometimes that is your debut. Sometimes that's a big moment. That's Marion Cotillard in La Vie en
Hmm.
Rose was just so undeniable. Not her first performance, obviously, but you know what I mean. So I think it
Yeah.
just really depends on what the story is and how the publicists are able to sell it.
That's a big part of it too. Yeah, and I think in the case of both of the actresses we're talking about today, some of their best work arguably remains these earlier performances in their careers.
Mhm.
And, we do have those moments where it does feel like right place, right time, plus it's maybe arguably their best performance. People like Julia Roberts and Aaron Brockovich, or Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs, or even recently like Michelle Yeoh in Everything Everywhere.
Mhm.
But more often than not, we do get into these situations where even if their Oscar win is a landmark moment for them, it does not mean that it will even be in their top 5 most interesting performances of their career.
Yeah.
And I do think, I don't know if you feel similarly, but it's kind of a reminder in this case that, like, that's okay. Because, like, the Oscars and their members are voting on what they feel is the most worthy performance in the individual year. And
Right.
it's why we have, like, some of the most worthy people still Oscarless, like Glenn Close, like Amy Adams, had to mention her. But, the many actors who have never even been nominated, even, who people do feel are worthy of an Oscar, but ultimately it's like, this isn't necessarily about career achievement. That does play a factor sometimes. And I
Yeah.
actually do think there is some validity to the idea of, like, knowing where, for example, like Demi Moore in The Substance, like knowing where she came from in her career and having that context in the lead up to that movie and seeing what she does in that film kind of synthesizes a lot of different elements of her career and her life. And I think it's okay to kind of have that context because it's hard to separate it.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of maybe a little obtuse to pretend that we can look at these things objectively and how we're not bringing our own baggage in a way to certain things.
Yeah, I'm sure it's hard not to bring that history into play. Perhaps, you're filling out your ballot and you're looking at your choices and you're like, well, I really wanted to give this person an Oscar before, but there was always somebody that edged it out just a little bit. Well, now's the time. And
Yeah.
that's how we get some of those awards.
Yes. Right. But yeah, like I said, it's important for me to not, like, let the Oscars off the hook because Lord knows they have their problems, but, like, we're making the distinction that the Oscars are responding to the moment. They're not being reflective. They're not even looking into the future to see what will hold up. Lord knows that's not the case. Uh, it's just very here and now, and they do make mistakes and they overlook great people all the time. And hindsight is 2020. All those things,
Mm.
but yes, we always do wish that they would be a little more willing to embrace a wider variety of kinds of performances, more comedic performances, like in the case of Reese, or movies that are in a, smaller scale, like Julianne Moore and Safe. But I do think it's just important to be mindful of the idea that the Oscars are not everything, and they're very present tense, and that will naturally lead us to look back and recognize just how often they miss the greatness. So,
Exactly.
with all of that said, let's dive into our first performance here, and it's a heavy one. Julianne Moore in Safe.
That I really hated myself before I came here, and so I'm trying to see myself hopefully more as I am, more more positive, like seeing the pluses. Like, I think it's slowly opening up now, people's minds, like educating and AIDS and other types of diseases, because and it is a disease because it's out there, and we just have to be more aware of it, with make people aware of it, and even ourselves, like reading labels and going into buildings.
So, for Julianne Moore, naturally, I discussed her quite a few times on the Best Actress series, so people don't need an introduction. But this is 2 years before she got her first Oscar nomination for Boogie Nights. To kind of remind folks of where she was at this point in her career, she had her run on As the World Turns in the late 80s, for which she won a Daytime Emmy. She had smaller roles in films. She did Uncle Vanya on the stage, and she had her breakthrough with Robert Altman's Shortcuts in 1993. Then she was in Vanya on 42nd Street the year after, and then she had Safe, which marked her first leading role, which I think is pretty remarkable to think about as you're watching the performance. But Safe also marks the first of many collaborations between her and Todd Haynes, the writer-director. So he had originally had Jennifer Jason Leigh in mind for this part, but she passed on the script. He was also going to cast Susan Norman in this role, but he changed his mind after Julianne interviewed for it, and they hit it off right away. And she fully understood the character, and she nailed the voice that Haynes wanted. So This is a psychological drama that also kind of verges into horror at times about a suburban housewife named Carol White, played by Julianne, who is living in 1987 in the San Fernando Valley with her husband and 10-year-old stepson. She has a seemingly ordinary life, but she soon starts developing an unexplainable sickness that may have something to do with chemicals in her environment, such as exhaust fumes and hairspray and pesticides. And she goes to various doctors who keep assuring her that she is still in good health. She doesn't really get answers, but her symptoms worsen over time, making her desperate to find a solution. And she ultimately moves to a desert community to try and get better. So let's get into it. Safe, what are your initial thoughts on this movie, your relationship to it, and on Julianne Moore's very physical performance here?
Safe is such a fascinating film. And both in her career and in the career of Todd Haynes. I watched it again last night. I have not seen it in several years. I had not seen it since COVID, actually. So
Oh boy.
watching it in that new context, I thought was very interesting. And Todd Haynes, at the time, this was 1995. He built a lot of anger at the government response, and the national response to the AIDS crisis is poured into that. But I felt like it had a renewed relevance in the post-COVID era. But I think what struck me so much about it watching it now is how Lynchian it felt. It almost feels like a lost David Lynch movie at times. And I watching what Julianne Moore was doing, I often kept thinking of Naomi Watts in Mulholland Drive,
Wow.
because there's almost an innocence to the performance. There's like this, plucky go-getter kind of vibe that she has that you see slowly dismantled over the course of the film. I love the physical changes that she goes through, with the vocal changes that she goes through. She does not sound like the same person at the end of the film that she is at the beginning of the film. And it's just such a raw transformation. It is incredible that this is her first lead role. I actually, on a whim, a few weeks ago, watched Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, and she is in that briefly. And this was just a few years before. And, seeing where she's come from to this moment to really become the actress that we know is really neat to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, this movie, it's one of those experiences when I first watched it where I just kind of sat there in a daze. And I guess it was fitting because it really spoke to me on a profound and very deep level, but also sort of like Carol in this movie, how she considers what she's going through. I feel like I wasn't able to identify exactly why the film was making me feel that way, but I just knew that there was something to it, And I could point to, like, obviously this great Julianne Moore performance, or these themes that I have always been interested in about, like, suburban ennui and all these things, and how Carol's struggles are so realistic and well drawn. But I don't know if I could fully put into words exactly why it kind of rattled me beyond that. And I think watching it again really crystallized for me, to your point about, post COVID, certainly tapped into some of those fears again about death and health anxiety, which is something that I happen to have a lot of, overshare, but that's the truth. And Haynes is just so smart, I think, in how he shoots this and the way he directs Julianne to make all of this feel so out of control in a way, like it's beyond her grasp what's happening. There really isn't like a central grounding force to sort of balance all of that out. And you do start to feel as helpless as Carol feels. And now that you're mentioning the Lynch comparison, it does have that nightmarish quality to it, I find. And yeah, just the cinematography with those wide shots, with her just kind of sitting in the center with all that empty space around her, all that really helps the performance too. And it really is such an incredible breakthrough moment for her as this leading lady star. And I find it to be just so remarkably subtle, but also showy within that. I know she said she lost a lot of weight for the film, and she struggled through the process of that and was very tired. And the look of brain fog, I think, may have actually been part of what Julianne herself may have been experiencing at the time, perhaps. But Yeah, it really is such a striking performance and so physically demanding. I find that she is able to make Carol such a sympathetic figure, even though she seems so ordinary and almost arguably uninteresting on the surface, you know?
I think that that's one of the things that fascinated me about the role, and something that watching this and the film that we're going to discuss next, Election, I noticed a kind of through line between both of them in that you kind of don't know whether to trust the protagonist. There is a certain point in the film where you're like, well, maybe she's crazy. Maybe this is all in her head. And it kind of starts having the audience question its own sanity a little bit. You almost start dismissing her feelings. You catch yourself thinking, okay, this is all in her head. This is crazy. There's no way this is real, but it is. That's not the point. But you start feeling those things that the people around her are feeling. And then you catch yourself doing that and realizing that the response to this disease that no one seems to know what it is there's something off about that as well. It's they're exploiting her somehow, or they're not really trying to cure her. They're just trying to figure out how they can make money off of her. And but I find that kind of not unreliable narrator necessarily, but just the idea that we don't really know where we stand with her, something really interesting. And I think that's something that Moore really conveys well here.
Yeah. And it reminds me of it was either something Todd Haynes said or something in my analysis. I read a lot of things after this movie because there's just so much extra textual stuff you can do with
Hmm.
this material. But I think it was something to the effect of like the audience is a little bit like the oppressor
Yeah.
as we're watching her. It's like that suffocating feeling for her. And we're just kind of watching it as these voyeurs. That is disturbing.
I think that image of the that you often see on the poster, which is that odd poster of the woman that's dressed head to toe in like this kind of
Mm,
makeshift PPE with the mask and the scrubs and all of that.
yeah.
That particular character too drives home that idea that maybe everybody at this camp is insane, like they're not actually sick, that it's a
Yeah.
psychosomatic kind of disease. And you're like, surely this is not that serious. Like it's almost like a tinfoil hat vibe that they're
Hmm.
not, but they are. And I think the movie kind of hits you in the face with that a little bit for having those feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love his Todd's confidence at such a young age to be doing that to the
Mhm.
audience, the intelligence there. But yes, to talk about her performance, I find that like you really see right away, I find like her blank expressions where like even like when they're having sex, her and her husband, he's just kind of going to town on her and it's just not pleasurable for
No.
her anymore. It's just like another chore to be done. And she
Mhm.
kind of is like holding him awkwardly so he can do his thing and just be done with it.
They're there.
Right. Right. And you kind of start to notice as she's speaking too, she keeps that like high register. It's so airy in the beginning and it really creates this effect, I think, of being ungrounded. Like it's smooth and it's like almost old fashioned the way her accent comes in. And like I even took note of a small scene like of her talking with her mother on the phone and being like, "Mother, I'm fine. I'm fine." And it's like this sort of dissonant effect of her saying she's fine. She says that so many times to so many people in the film, but you're not sensing the fine within that. And like when she's telling the other women at her aerobics class, like, yeah, I don't really sweat. And she just kind of smiles it off. But it's like, it sounds a little too perfect, like a little too refined. Like she's practiced how to appear fine to other people while knowing that maybe she's not subconsciously.
I think it's that kind of dark side of suburbia thing that
Mm-hmm.
makes it feel so Lynchian and how we deal with sickness in this country.
Yeah.
I was reminded a little bit. I rewatched Angels in America recently, and there's a line in that of "This is no country for the infirm," and the idea that we
Mm-hmm.
we try to sweep that under the rug, we try to hide it. Like we've always got to keep up appearances and make sure that everything is perfect on the surface, because we don't want to allow ourselves to be seen as weak or vulnerable. And I feel like that really comes across through her. And, she's got this idyllic kind of life, and she is trying to maintain this persona that is quickly crumbling around her. One of the moments that stood out the most for me is the moment at the birthday party when the little
Oh
girl is on her
God.
lap and she starts like seizing up and she can't breathe. And people around her at this birthday party, all these like suburban mothers, almost look at her like she's just sprouted three heads and she's some kind of monster. Now she is not part of this perfect tapestry that they're weaving. And there's such a tragedy in that. Like you really feel for her in that moment. And watching what Moore does there, and especially again at the end in that haunting final shot where she's looking in the
Mm.
mirror, but she's looking at the audience, is really just incredible.
Yeah. That scene at that party. It's so difficult, so uncomfortable. I just want to leave the room when I'm watching that. I'm just like, I don't want to be complicit in what's happening here. But yeah, like the way she starts hyperventilating, it's so unnerving. And again, it's the way it's filmed too that really aids in her performance. Just that wide shot where she's sitting in the middle and there's so much empty space and it looks so beige and sterile, and she
Mhm.
just can't stop and catch her breath at all. And even the kid on her lap is being like, what's going on with this lady? Like, what should I move? Like, yeah. But and the look on Carol's face is like, again, all control has slipped away from her and she can't grasp it. She's kind of grasping for that centered place again, and she can't ever get there. Very committed work from Julianne there.
Sure.
Oof.
And I think too, one of the layers, and this is why the movie's so amazing, is all the layers that are packed into it. But just this idea that the sickness is an environmental allergy. It's almost like Haynes himself is like, I cannot stand my surroundings. Like she is in this
Mm,
suffocating environment, and it is the environment itself that is making her sick. This entire like suburban culture is affecting her. And I think that's really interesting.
yeah. Are you allergic to the 20th century?
I'm allergic to the 21st century.
Lord knows. Yes. I don't know. A desert community sounds nice right about now. Just saying. I do want to also mention the trips to the doctor, too, which I find so disturbing and realistic, sadly. Like, even when she goes to the psychiatrist, it's like she's very visibly tired there because she's answering some of his kind of small talk questions, but he just kind of like straight up asks her to like identify what her problem is, and she can't. Like, she doesn't know what it is. That's
Mhm.
part of the problem. And her growing disappointment, I think, is very subtly done and very effective. And to reference my own life again, like I've been there myself with like being in the doctor's office and realizing either like this is not a good fit, this person is not actually seeming to care to fix me or whatever, or like you've gone to this place to help you kind of express your concerns, but you can't fully explain what it is, and they kind of assure you, I'm sure it's fine, it's just a cold or whatever, that you have nothing to worry about, but like deep down you know that there's still something there, and you're trying to like get this person to take it seriously, and they are just not. They're kind of again assuring you that maybe it is kind of all in your head. Very unnerving. And I don't think I've seen another film that really taps into that feeling quite as effectively.
And you can see that hopelessness in her eyes. Like I think it's
Mm-hmm.
like the system browbeats her to the point where she's almost not human anymore. She's just a shadow of the person that she once was by the end. And that's what really makes the film so harrowing, and she sells it so well.
Thank you for listening to this preview of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerupis and become a patron. Only $5 a month will get you access to bonus episodes, exclusive polls, and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.